In the year 793 AD, a shadow fell upon the holy island of Lindisfarne. Viking raiders, emerging from the mists of the North Sea, launched a brutal attack on the island monastery, forever changing the course of history. This series delves into the shocking events of that fateful day, exploring the motivations of the raiders, the devastating impact on the Anglo-Saxon world, and the legacy of the Lindisfarne Raid. Through archaeological evidence, historical accounts, and expert analysis, we'll unravel the mysteries of this pivotal moment in Viking history. The North Sea, cold, grey, and restless, a place of myths and legends, where the land meets the water in a dramatic clash of elements. Here, just off the coast of Northumbria, lies a sanctuary, a place of peace and prayer. This is Lindisfarne, the Holy Island, in the year of our Lord 793. Lindisfarne is more than just an island. It's a symbol of faith, a beacon of Christianity in a world still grappling with the shadows of paganism. Founded in 635 AD by Saint Aidan, a missionary from Iona, it has become a thriving monastic community, a center of learning and spiritual devotion. The Venerable Bede, a Northumbrian monk and historian, describes Lindisfarne as this. This is a place of great sanctity and devotion, where the monks lived according to the rule of Saint Benedict, being occupied in prayer, study, and the service of God. Within the walls of the monastery, life follows a strict rhythm. The monks rise before dawn, their days filled with prayer, study, and labor. They tend to their gardens, care for the sick, and provide hospitality to pilgrims who journey to the island seeking spiritual solace. The monks of Lindisfarne are also renowned for their scholarship and artistry. The Lindisfarne Gospels, a masterpiece of illuminated manuscripts, stand as a testament to their devotion and skill. These intricately decorated pages, filled with vibrant colors and elaborate calligraphy, preserve the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But Lindisfarne is not just a place of spiritual devotion. It's also a place of political significance. Northumbria, in the late 8th century, is a powerful kingdom, its influence stretching across much of northern England. Lindisfarne, with its revered monastery and its connection to St. Cuthbert, a beloved hermit and miracle worker, is a jewel in the crown of Northumbria. However, this golden age is not without its challenges. Northumbria is beset by internal strife, its rulers vying for power, its borders vulnerable to attack. The kingdom's wealth and prestige have attracted the attention of envious neighbors, and whispers of war and unrest echo through the land. In the years leading up to 793 AD, a series of ominous events unfold. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, a historical record of the time, speaks of terrible portents, strange lights in the sky, fiery dragons seen flying through the air, and whirlwinds that tear through the countryside. The Chronicle writes, "In this year there were dreadful forewarnings come over the land of the Northumbrians, and miserably terrified the people. These were excessive whirlwinds and lightnings, and fiery dragons were seen flying in the air." On a seemingly ordinary day in June, a lookout on the island spots a sight that sends shivers down his spine. On the horizon, emerging from the morning mist, are several longships, their sails billowing in the wind. These are no ordinary vessels. They are the sleek and fearsome warships of the Vikings, their prows adorned with menacing dragon heads. The monks of Lindisfarne, accustomed to a life of peace and prayer, are ill prepared for the violence that is about to descend upon them. They watch in horror as the longships approach the shore, their decks swarming with fierce warriors, their axes and swords glinting in the sunlight. The peaceful sanctuary of Holy Island is about to be shattered. Alcuin, a scholar and advisor to Charlemagne, would later write of the raid. He writes, "Lo, the church of St. Cuthbert, sprinkled with the blood of the priests of God, despoiled of all its ornaments, a place more venerable than all in Britain, is given as a prey to pagan peoples." The arrival of the Viking longships mark a turning point in history, the beginning of a new era of violence and upheaval. The raid on Lindisfarne will send shockwaves through the Christian world, forever altering the course of Anglo-Saxon England. The fury of the Northmen has been unleashed, and the peaceful haven of Holy Island is about to face its darkest hour. The idyllic tranquility of Lindisfarne is shattered. The Viking longships, sleek predators of the sea, have reached the shore. Warriors surge forward, their faces grim, their eyes burning with a fierce intensity. The monks, caught off guard, can only watch in terror as the invaders descend upon their sacred island. The Vikings, masters of surprise attacks, waste no time. They storm the monastery, their axes and swords tearing through the flimsy defenses of the monks. The monks, unarmed and unprepared for such brutality, are cut down where they stand. The peaceful sanctuary is transformed into a scene of carnage. The Chronicle describes the attack with chilling brevity. In this year, fierce heathen men miserably destroyed God's church in Lindisfarne Island by rapine and slaughter. The Vikings, driven by a thirst for plunder and glory, show no mercy. They rampage through the monastery, looting its treasures and desecrating its sacred spaces. The altar is overturned, the relics scattered, the holy books torn and trampled. The air is thick with the stench of blood and burning wood. The Vikings were incredibly effective warriors. Their tactics relied on speed, surprise, and overwhelming force. They were skilled in the use of a variety of weapons, including axes, swords, and spears. Their longships, designed for both speed and maneuverability, allowed them to strike quickly and disappear just as rapidly. The monks, faced with this onslaught, have few options. Some attempt to flee, seeking refuge in the surrounding countryside. Others barricade themselves within the church, praying for deliverance. But the Vikings are relentless, their fury fueled by the promise of riches and the thrill of conquest. The fate of the monks and islanders is grim. Many are killed outright, their bodies left to rot in the sun. Others are taken captive, destined for a life of slavery in a foreign land. A few manage to escape, fleeing across the treacherous waters to the mainland, carrying with them the horrifying tale of the raid. Simeon of Durham, writing centuries later, recounts the gruesome details. Some of the brethren were slain with the sword, others were carried off in chains. Some were drowned in the sea, others were miserably tormented with hunger and thirst, that they might reveal where the treasures of the church were hidden. The Vikings, having satiated their bloodlust, turned their attention to the spoils of war. They stripped the monastery of its treasures, loading their longships with gold, silver, jewels, and sacred artifacts. The Lindisfarne Gospels, a priceless treasure, are among the stolen goods. Alcuin, lamenting the loss, writes, "The heathen poured out the blood of saints around the altar, and trampled on the bodies of saints in the temple of God, like dung in the streets." The raid on Lindisfarne is more than just a brutal attack. It's a sacrilege, a violation of a sacred space. The Vikings, in their ruthless pursuit of wealth and glory, have struck at the very heart of Northumbrian Christianity. The consequences of their action will reverberate throughout the kingdom and beyond, casting a long shadow of fear and uncertainty over the Christian world. The Viking longships have vanished over the horizon, leaving behind a scene of devastation. Lindisfarne, the Holy Island, lies in ruins, its sanctuary violated, its peace shattered. The survivors, those who escaped the slaughter, emerge from their hiding places, their faces etched with grief and disbelief. The immediate aftermath of the raid is one of chaos and confusion. The monks who survived tend to the wounded, bury the dead, and assess the extent of the damage. The once proud monastery is a smoldering ruin, its treasures looted, its sacred spaces desecrated. The community is in shock, struggling to comprehend the violence that has been inflicted upon them. Simeon of Durham writes, "The church was left bare, with its altars overturned, its treasures plundered, and its holy relics scattered. The monks who survived were scattered like sheep without a shepherd, their hearts filled with fear and sorrow." The impact of the raid extends far beyond the physical destruction. The attack on Lindisfarne strikes at the very heart of Northumbrian Christianity, leaving a deep psychological and spiritual wound. The belief in the sanctity of holy places is shaken, and a sense of vulnerability pervades the land. The attack on Lindisfarne was not just a physical assault, it was a spiritual assault as well. It challenged the very foundations of Christian belief, raising questions about the power of God and the vulnerability of holy places. The trauma of the raid would have had a profound impact on the religious consciousness of the time. The news of the raid spreads like wildfire, carried by terrified refugees and traveling merchants. The accounts of the Vikings' brutality and the desecration of the Holy Island sent shockwaves through the Christian world. Alcuin of York, a prominent scholar and advisor to Charlemagne, is deeply affected by the news. Alcuin writes, "What may I say concerning that place, which was more venerable and holy than all in Britain, being plundered, and the church of St. Cuthbert sprinkled with the blood of the priests of God, despoiled of all its ornaments. A place more venerable than all in Britain is given as a prey to pagan peoples." Alcuin's writings capture the horror and despair that gripped the Christian community. He laments the loss of life, the destruction of sacred treasures, and the violation of a holy place. He calls for repentance and reform, urging the people to turn back to God and seek His protection. Alcuin writes, "Behold, the church of St. Cuthbert is sprinkled with the blood of the priests of God, despoiled of all its ornaments. A place more venerable than all in Britain is given as a prey to pagan peoples. It is time for us to weep and lament before God and to amend our sinful lives." The fear of further Viking raids spreads throughout Europe. Monasteries and coastal communities reinforce their defenses, bracing themselves for the next possible attack. The Vikings, once seen as a distant threat, are now a terrifying reality, their reputation for brutality and ruthlessness preceding them. The raid on Lindisfarne has shattered the illusion of safety and security in the Christian world. The shockwaves of sacrilege reverberate far and wide, leaving a legacy of fear and vulnerability. The Vikings have emerged from the shadows, and the world will never be the same. The attack on Lindisfarne sent shockwaves through the Christian world. But who were these fierce warriors who emerged from the mists, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake? Where did they come from? And what drove them to such violence? The raiders who descended upon Lindisfarne were Vikings, most likely from Norway or Denmark. The distinction between these Scandinavian groups was blurred in the 8th century, but both shared a seafaring culture and a warrior ethos. Their longships, sleek and swift, allowed them to traverse vast distances, striking targets with terrifying speed and efficiency. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, while sparse in its details, refers to the attackers as heathen men, highlighting the religious difference between the Christian Anglo-Saxons and the pagan Vikings. It states, "In this year, fierce heathen men miserably destroyed God's church in Lindisfarne Island by rapine and slaughter." Dr. Eleanor Rosamund Barraclough, a renowned historian of the Viking Age, reminds us that while religion played a role, the Vikings were not driven solely by religious animosity. In her book, The Anglo-Saxon World, she writes, "The motives behind Viking raids were undoubtedly mixed, with greed for plunder often combining with a desire for land or slaves, or simply the urge for adventure and the challenge of a fight." The primary motive for the Lindisfarne raid was undoubtedly one of plunder. The monastery, known for its wealth and sacred treasures, was a tempting target, The Vikings sought gold, silver, jewels, and religious artifacts, all of which could be traded or used to enhance their own status back home. But plunder was not the only motive. The Viking Age was a time of political upheaval and social change in Scandinavia. Population pressures, competition for resources, and the desire for new lands may have driven some to seek their fortunes overseas. The Icelandic sagas, written centuries later, often depict Viking heroes seeking fame and glory through daring raids and conquests. These sagas, while embellished with legend, offer insights into the Viking mindset, their values of courage, strength, and loyalty. The Vikings were not just ruthless warriors, they were also explorers, traders, and settlers and farmers. They possessed a strong sense of adventure and a willingness to take risks. The lure of the unknown, the challenge of navigating uncharted waters, and the prospect of discovering new lands may have also played a role in their expansion across Europe. Dr. Søren Mikael Sindbeck, an archaeologist specializing in Viking Age settlements, highlights the importance of studying everyday objects to understand Viking society. In his paper, The Rural Settlements of Viking Age Denmark, he states, "The study of settlement archaeology allows us to address questions about the social and economic organization of Viking Age society, including the roles of different social groups, the organization of production and exchange, and the relationship between settlement and landscape." Recent archaeological investigations at Lindisfarne and other Viking raid sites have yielded tantalizing clues about the raiders themselves. Analysis of skeletal remains reveals information about their diet, health, and origins. The discovery of weapons, tools, and personal ornaments sheds light on their equipment and cultural practices. While the exact identities of the Lindisfarne raiders may remain shrouded in mystery, the archaeological evidence, combined with historical accounts, helps us to reconstruct their world, to understand their motivations, and to appreciate the complex factors that drove them to launch their devastating attack on the Holy Island. The raid on Lindisfarne was a pivotal moment in history, a clash between two worlds, two cultures, two belief systems. By understanding the motivations and mindset of the Viking raiders, drawing on both historical and archaeological evidence, we can gain a deeper appreciation of the forces that shaped this tumultuous era. Centuries have passed since the Viking raid on Lindisfarne, but the island still holds secrets buried beneath the layers of time. Archaeology, the science of uncovering the past, allows us to delve into these secrets, to piece together the fragments of history, and gain a deeper understanding of the events that transpired on that fateful day in 793 AD. Lindisfarne has been the subject of numerous archaeological investigations over the years, each investigation revealing new layers of history. The earliest investigations in the 19th century focused on the medieval priory that was built on the site of the original monastery, but more recent excavations using modern techniques and technology have shed new light on the Viking Age and the impact of the raid. Professor David Petz, a leading expert on the archaeology of Lindisfarne, highlights the richness of the site. In an interview with Dig Ventures, he stated, "Lindisfarne is a remarkably rich archaeological site. The excavations have revealed evidence of human activity spanning centuries, from the early monastic settlement to the medieval priory and beyond. We've uncovered the remains of buildings, workshops, cemeteries, and everyday objects, all of which contribute to our understanding of life on the island before, during, and after the Viking raid." One of the most significant discoveries was the unearthing of a cemetery dating back to the 8th century. The skeletal remains provide valuable insights into the health and demographics of the island's population. Some of the skeletons bear evidence of trauma, suggesting that they may have been victims of the Viking attack. The historical source, called the Archaeology of Lindisfarne, is a comprehensive volume detailing the archaeological findings from Lindisfarne, including the analysis of the skeletal remains. It states, Some of the skeletons exhibit evidence of perimortem trauma, including sharp force injuries and blunt force trauma, consistent with the violence associated with a Viking raid. The excavations have also revealed the scars of the raid, the physical evidence of the destruction wrought by the Vikings. Burnt timbers and collapsed walls testify to the ferocity of the attack. Hidden caches of valuables, hastily buried by the monks in an attempt to protect them from the raiders, have been unearthed, offering a glimpse into the monastery's lost treasures. Dr. Sarah Semple, an expert in the Viking Age archaeology, emphasizes the impact of these raids in her book, The Viking Age in Ireland. She writes, "The archaeological evidence from raids such as those on Lindisfarne and Iona and Scattery Island in Ireland paints a vivid picture of the violence and destruction associated with the Viking raids. The burnt structures, the scattered human remains, and the hidden treasures all speak to the chaos and trauma of the event." Modern forensic techniques such as DNA analysis and isotopic studies are now being applied to the archaeological evidence from Lindisfarne. These techniques can provide new insights into the origins of the raiders, their health, and their diet. They can also help to identify the victims of the raid and shed light on their lives and deaths. Dr. Kat Yarman, a bioarchaeologist with expertise in Viking Age populations, explains the potential of these techniques. By applying modern forensic techniques to the archaeological remains, we can extract new layers of information about the past. We can analyze DNA to trace ancestry and identify individuals. We can examine isotopes in bones and teeth to determine where people grew up and what they ate. These techniques offer exciting possibilities for reconstructing the events of the Lindisfarne Raid in greater detail. The archaeological evidence from Lindisfarne is not unique. Similar patterns of destruction and plunder have been found at other early Viking raid sites in Britain and Ireland, such as Iona in Scotland and Rathlin Island in Ireland. These sites offer comparative evidence, helping us to understand the broader context of Viking raiding activity in the 8th and 9th centuries. The Annals of Ulster, a chronicle of medieval Irish history, record a Viking raid on Iona in 795 AD, just 2 years after Lindisfarne. The entry states, "The devastation of all the islands of Britain by the Gentiles." This brief but poignant entry highlights the widespread fear and impact of Viking raids during this period. The archaeological evidence from Lindisfarne provides a tangible link to the past, allowing us to walk in the footsteps of those who lived and died on the Holy Island. By carefully excavating and analyzing the remains of this ancient site, we can piece together the story of the Viking raid, understand its impact, and gain a deeper appreciation for the human drama that unfolded centuries ago. The raid on Lindisfarne exposed the vulnerability of the Anglo-Saxon world to the rising power of the Vikings. But who were these people who dared to challenge the established order? What was their world like, and what drove them to venture across the seas, seeking plunder and glory? To understand the Vikings, we must journey back to their homeland, to the rugged landscapes of Scandinavia. Viking society was complex and dynamic, with a social structure based on a hierarchy of chiefs, freemen, and slaves. Family ties were strong, and honor was paramount. The Icelandic sagas, written centuries later, provide a glimpse into the social dynamics of Viking Age Scandinavia. They tell tales of feuds and alliances, of love and betrayal, of honor and revenge. In Egil's saga, for instance, we see the protagonist, Egil Skallagrimsson, navigate the complexities of Viking society, facing challenges to his honor and engaging in violent feuds. This saga, while somewhat fictionalized, reflects the importance of personal reputation and the intricate web of social obligations that governed Viking societies. Stefan Brink and Neil Price, the authors of the book called Viking Worlds, write, "The Viking world was not a monolithic entity. It was a patchwork of kingdoms, chiefdoms, and independent communities, each with its own customs and traditions. However, there were also common threads that united the Vikings, including a shared language, a warrior ethos, and a belief in the Norse gods. The Vikings were master shipbuilders and navigators. Their longships, sleek and sturdy, were technological marvels of their time. Clinker-built, with overlapping planks, they were both strong and flexible, capable of withstanding the harsh conditions of the North Sea and navigating shallow coastal waters. Brugger and Shettelik, in their classic study of Viking shipbuilding, called The Viking Ship, described the longships as masterpieces of craftsmanship, combining elegance and functionality. They were perfectly adapted to the needs of the Vikings, allowing them to travel vast distances, raid coastal settlements, and explore new lands. The Vikings navigated by the stars, the sun, and the currents. They possessed an intimate knowledge of the sea, its moods, and its secrets. They used landmarks, the flight patterns of birds, and even the behavior of whales to guide their way across the vast expanse of the ocean. While not a first-hand account, the Konungsskugsa, a 13th century Norwegian text, provides valuable insights into medieval Scandinavian seafaring and navigational techniques. It describes the use of landmarks, celestial observations, even the observation of seabirds to guide ships across the open ocean. The Vikings believed in a pantheon of powerful gods and goddesses, led by Odin, the Allfather. Their mythology was rich with tales of heroism, betrayal, and the struggle between good and evil. They believed in an afterlife, Valhalla, where warriors who died bravely in battle would feast and fight for eternity. Turvild Petra, the author of Myth and Religion of the North, the Religion of Ancient Scandinavia, is a leading scholar of Norse mythology, and writes, "The Viking worldview was shaped by their belief in the Norse gods and the stories of their exploits. These myths provided a framework for understanding the world, for explaining the forces of nature, and for defining the values and ideals of Viking society." The Vikings' beliefs about the afterlife, Valhalla, may have influenced their willingness to take risks and face death in battle. They believed that a glorious death in combat would secure their place in Valhalla, a reward far greater than any earthly riches. The Poetic Edda, a collection of Old Norse poems, contains numerous verses that describe Valhalla and the fate of warriors who die in battle. One verse states, "The Einherjar, the brave warriors who have fallen in battle, gather in Valhalla, where they feast and fight each day, preparing for the final battle at Ragnarok." The Viking legacy extends far beyond their raids and conquest. Their influence can be seen in the languages, the names of the places, and the cultural traditions of many countries. Particularly in Britain and Ireland, their art, their shipbuilding skills, and their adventurous spirit have left an indelible mark on the world. Sawyer, the author of the Oxford Illustrated History of the Vikings, in his overview of Viking history and culture, writes, "The Vikings were not just raiders and conquerors, they were also traders, explorers, and settlers. They made significant contributions to the development of European society, leaving a lasting legacy in the languages, laws, and customs of many countries." Today, the Vikings continue to fascinate and inspire. Their stories are told and retold in books, films, and television shows. Their culture is celebrated in museums and festivals around the world. The legacy of the Vikings, once feared and reviled, is now recognized as an integral part of our shared human heritage, especially in Northern Europe. The raid on Lindisfarne in 793 AD sent shockwaves through the Christian world, exposing the vulnerability of the Anglo-Saxon kingdom to a new and terrifying threat. The Vikings, with their swift longships and fierce warriors, had breached the defenses of a kingdom that had long considered itself secure and safe. But how did the Anglo-Saxons respond to this unprecedented challenge? Did they crumble in the face of this aggression, or did they find ways to adapt and resist? In the immediate aftermath of the Lindisfarne Raid, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were ill-prepared to mount a unified defense. England was divided into several independent kingdoms: Northumbria, Mercia, East Anglia, Wessex, Kent, and others, often engaged in conflicts with each other. This political fragmentation hampered their ability to respond effectively to the Viking threat. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, in its entry for 793 AD, laments the lack of unity among the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. This year, dire forewarnings came over the land of Northumbrians and miserably terrified the people. In the same year, the ravaging of heathen men lamentably destroyed God's church at Lindisfarne with plunder and slaughter. The Chronicle goes on to describe the internal conflicts and power struggles that plagued Northumbria and other kingdoms, hindering their ability to respond to the Viking threat. James Campbell, a leading historian of Anglo-Saxon England, writes in The Anglo-Saxons, "The political landscape of 8th century England was fragmented and unstable. The various kingdoms were often engaged in conflict with each other, vying for power and territory. This lack of unity made them vulnerable to external threats, such as the Viking raids. However, the Anglo-Saxons were not passive in the face of the Viking threat. They gradually adapted their military strategies and defenses, learning from their encounters with the raiders. Initially, their military organization was based on the Fyrd, a militia composed of free men, which proved ineffective against the swift Viking raids. Mark Morris, the author of The English and the Norman Conquests, in his analysis of the Anglo-Saxon response to the Vikings in The English and the Norman Conquests, argues that the Anglo-Saxons were not simply overwhelmed by the Viking onslaught. They learned from their defeats and adapted their military strategies, eventually developing effective methods to resist the invaders. One crucial adaptation was the development of fortified towns, known as burhs. These served as defensive strongholds and provided refuge for the population during attacks. The Burgal Hidage lists a series of fortified towns in Wessex. A document from the late 9th or early 10th century called the Burgal Hidage lists a series of fortified towns in Wessex and provides details about their defenses and garrisons. This document highlights the efforts made by the Anglo-Saxons to strengthen their defenses against Viking attacks. Ryan Lavelle, in the book Warfare in Anglo-Saxon England, explains, "The burhs were more than just defensive structures, they were also centers of administration, trade, and craft production, playing a vital role in the economic and social life of Anglo-Saxon England." The Anglo-Saxons also reformed their armies, shifting from a reliance on the Fyrd to a more professional force. This included the development of a standing army of housecarls, elite warriors who served the king or a powerful lord. Stephen Pollington, in The Anglo-Saxon Tegan, details the evolution of the Anglo-Saxon military. The increasing professionalism of Anglo-Saxon warfare is reflected in the development of the housecarl, a full-time warrior who dedicated himself to the service of his lord. The housecarls were well-equipped and highly trained, forming a formidable fighting force. Out of the chaos and fragmentation of the early Viking Age, one kingdom emerged as a dominant power: Wessex. Under the leadership of a series of strong kings, such as Egbert, Ethelwulf, and Ethelbald, Wessex gradually expanded its territory and influence, becoming a bulwark against the Viking incursions. Asser, a contemporary biographer of Alfred the Great, describes the rise of Wessex in his writings. King Alfred gathered together all the peoples of his kingdoms and continually made war on the heathens, fighting many battles against them everywhere throughout his kingdom, with varying fortunes, but for the most part with success. Alfred the Great, who ruled Wessex from 871 to 899 AD, is considered one of the most important figures in Anglo-Saxon history. He was a skilled military leader, a wise administrator, and a patron of learning. He reformed the army, further developing the system of burhs, and commissioned the translation of key texts into Old English, fostering a cultural revival. We have one academic source which details this. The name of it is Alfred the Great, War, Kingship and Culture in Anglo-Saxon England. This collection of essays by leading scholars explores the varying facets of Alfred's reign and his impact on Anglo-Saxon England. It highlights his role in resisting the Vikings, reforming the kingdom, and promoting education and literacy. One contributor, Professor Simon Keynes, notes, Alfred's reign marks a turning point in Anglo-Saxon history. He not only saved Wessex from Viking conquest, but also laid the foundations for the creation of a unified English kingdom. Alfred's efforts laid the foundation for the eventual unification of England under his successors. He is remembered as a symbol of resilience, a king who not only defended his kingdom against a formidable enemy, but also fostered a cultural and intellectual renaissance. The Anglo-Saxon response to the Viking threat was a complex and evolving process. Initially hampered by political fragmentation, they gradually adapted their military strategies, strengthening their defenses, and ultimately emerged stronger and more united. The rise of Wessex and the reign of Alfred the Great marked a turning point in Anglo-Saxon history, paving the way for a new era of strength and prosperity and unification. The raid on Lindisfarne was not an isolated incident. It was a harbinger of a new era, a period of intense Viking activity that would transform the political and cultural landscape of Britain and Ireland. What began as a hit-and-run raids evolved into large-scale invasions, conquests, and ultimately settlements. In the decades following Lindisfarne, Viking raids became more frequent and more ambitious. They targeted not only monasteries, but also coastal towns and even major cities. The Anglo-Saxons, despite their efforts to strengthen their defenses, struggled initially to contain the Viking onslaught. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle provides a grim record of the escalating Viking raids. In the year 835 AD, this year heathen men ravaged Sheppey. In the year 836 AD, this year the heathen ravaged Dorsetshire. Then in the year 840 AD, this year Ealdorman Wulfhere fought at Southampton against the crews of 35 ships, and there made great slaughter. In the year 851 AD, this year the heathen men first remained over winter in Thanet. These entries illustrate the growing scale and intensity of Viking activity in England. Max Adams, a military historian specializing in the Viking Age, writes in the Viking Wars, the Vikings' initial raids were opportunistic, targeting wealthy and vulnerable cities and sites, but as their success grew, so did their ambitions. They began to overwinter in England, establishing bases from which to launch further attacks and eventually conquer territory. The Vikings were not just raiders and warriors, they were also skilled farmers, traders, and artisans. As they established a foothold in England, they began to settle down, creating their own communities and integrating with the existing population. This led to the emergence of the Danelaw, a large swath of eastern and northern England under Viking control. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records the establishment of the Danelaw. In the year 878 AD, this year the army of Vikings rode across Mercia into East Anglia and took winter quarters at Thetford. And that year King Alfred fought against the whole army at Edington, and there put them to flight. And then he made peace with the Viking army. This peace treaty, known as the Treaty of Wedmore, formally recognized the division of England between the Anglo-Saxons and the Vikings. Donald Logan, in the book The Vikings in History, provides context for the Danelaw's development. He writes, the establishment of the Danelaw was a gradual process, resulting from a series of Viking victories and settlements. It marked a significant turning point in English history, leading to a period of cultural exchange and political division. The Viking influence on England was profound and multifaceted. They introduced new words into the English language, many of which are still in use today, such as sky, anger, and husband. They also influenced place names, particularly in the Danelaw, where many towns and villages bear Scandinavian names. Their legal customs and social practices blended with those of the Anglo-Saxons, creating a sort of hybrid culture. Peter Hunter Blair, a renowned historian of the Viking Age in England, writes in his book The Vikings in England, "The Viking impact on England was not simply one of destruction and conquest, it was also a period of cultural exchange and assimilation. The Vikings brought with them new ideas, new technologies, and new ways of life, which enriched and transformed English society." The Domesday Book, commissioned by William the Conqueror, was a survey of England completed in 1086. It provides evidence of the lasting Viking influence on England. It records the presence of Scandinavian landowners and communities in many parts of the country, particularly in the north and the east. The Viking Age in England was not destined to last forever. By the late 10th century, the tide had begun to turn. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, united under the rule of powerful kings like Athelstan and Edgar, gradually regained control of the Danelaw. The Viking threat was further diminished by the internal divisions and conflicts within Scandinavia. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records the reconquest of the Danelaw and the final defeat of the Viking armies. In the year 927, this year King Athelstan gained the kingdom of York. In the year 1016, this year King Knut gained the whole kingdom of England. Knut, a Danish king, ruled England for nearly 2 decades, but his reign marked the end of the Viking era in England. Richard Fletcher, in his comprehensive history of England, concludes in the book The Making of England. The Viking Age in England was a period of profound transformation, a time of violence and upheaval, but also of cultural exchange and adaptation. It left a lasting legacy on the language, law, and identity of the English people. The age of Viking expansion was a defining era in the history of Britain and Ireland. It was a time of conflict and change, but also of cultural enrichment and adaptation. The Viking, once feared as ruthless raiders, became an integral part of the fabric of English society, leaving a lasting legacy that continues to shape our world today. The Viking Raid on Lindisfarne, a cataclysmic event that sent shockwaves through the early medieval world, continues to resonate centuries later. The Holy Island, once a symbol of vulnerability, has been reborn as a place of pilgrimage, remembrance, and cultural significance. The legacy of the raid is deeply ingrained in the identity of Lindisfarne. It's a story of destruction and loss, but also of resilience and renewal. The island's history, marked by both tragedy and triumph, draws visitors from around the world to this day, seeking to connect with the past and explore the enduring power of faith and the human spirit. The ruins of the medieval priory, built centuries after the Viking raid, stand as a testament to the enduring importance of Lindisfarne as a religious site. The priory, though itself dissolved in the 16th century during the English Reformation, remains a powerful symbol of the island's spiritual heritage. David Bates, in his comprehensive history of Lindisfarne, writes, "The priory, built on the site of the original monastery, served as a reminder of the island's long and distinguished history as a center of Christian worship and learning. Despite the destruction wrought by the Vikings, Lindisfarne remained a place of pilgrimage and spiritual significance throughout the medieval period. In the 20th century, a new monastic community was established on Lindisfarne, reviving the island's ancient tradition of prayer and contemplation. The community, known as the Lindisfarne Community, embraces a contemporary approach to spirituality, drawing inspiration from various religious and philosophical traditions. Their website states that they aim to live a simple life based on the values of peace, love, and understanding, and to be a place of sanctuary and healing for all. Lindisfarne is now a popular tourist destination, attracting visitors who come to explore its history, its natural beauty, and its spiritual significance. The island's economy is largely dependent on tourism, with visitors contributing to local businesses and supporting the preservation of its heritage. According to The site, Visit Northumberland. They write, Lindisfarne, or Holy Island as it is also known, is one of the most important centers of early English Christianity. The website highlights the island's historical significance, its natural beauty, and its diverse attractions, including the Lindisfarne Castle, the Priory Ruins, and the Lindisfarne Gospels. But Lindisfarne is more than just a tourist attraction. It is a place that continues to capture the imagination of people centuries after the Viking Raid. The story of the attack, with its themes of violence, faith, and resilience, resonates with people on a deep level. Donald Logan, in the book The Vikings in History, explores the enduring fascination with the Vikings. The Viking Age holds a powerful grip on the modern imagination. Theirs is a story of daring exploration, fierce independence, and a cultural impact that extends far beyond their Scandinavian homelands. The enduring fascination with Lindisfarne Raid may stem from its symbolic power. It represents a clash between two worlds, two cultures, two belief systems. It is a story of loss and destruction, but also of survival and renewal. It reminds us of the fragility of human civilization, but also of the enduring power of faith and the human spirit. Else Rosdahl, in the book The Cambridge Illustrated History of the Vikings, reflects on the significance of the Lindisfarne Raid. She writes, the attack on Lindisfarne has come to symbolize the beginning of the Viking Age, a period of expansion and interaction that profoundly shaped the course of European history. Lindisfarne, the Holy Island, stands as a testament to the enduring power of the past. The Viking Raid, a defining moment in its history, continues to shape its identity and inspire visitors from around the world. It is a place where history, faith, and natural beauty converge, creating a unique and unforgettable experience to this day. The raid on Lindisfarne, a brutal act of violence that shattered the peace of a sacred island, echoes through the centuries. But the echoes are not just of destruction and loss. They also speak of resilience, adaptation, and the power of the human spirit. As we conclude our journey through the history of the Lindisfarne Raid, we reflect on the lessons we can learn from this pivotal event, lessons that remain relevant in our own troubled times. The human cost of conflict is immeasurable. The Viking Raid on Lindisfarne, though a relatively small-scale event in the grand scheme of history, caused immense suffering and loss. Monks were slaughtered, treasures were plundered, and a community was traumatized. The broader Viking Age, with its centuries of raids, invasions, and wars, left an indelible mark on the people and landscapes of Europe. Alcuin of York, writing in the aftermath of the Lindisfarne Raid, lamented the human cost of the violence. The church of St. Cuthbert, spattered with the blood of the priests of God, despoiled of all its ornaments, a place more venerable than all in Britain, is given as a prey to pagan peoples. It is time for us to weep and lament before God, and to amend our sinful lives. In the book called War and Society in the Early Middle Ages, Philippe Contamine explores the impact of warfare on medieval society. He writes, warfare in the early Middle Ages was a brutal and destructive force, causing widespread suffering and disruption to communities. The Viking raids were a particularly devastating form of warfare, targeting vulnerable coastal communities and religious centers. The fragility of peace is a stark reality that the Lindisfarne Raid brings into sharp focus. The attack shattered the illusion of security and stability that the monks and islanders had enjoyed. It highlighted the vulnerability of even the most sacred places to the forces of violence and chaos. Guy Halsall, in the book The Dynamics of Warfare in the Early Middle Ages, examines the shifting nature of warfare in early medieval Europe. He argues that the Viking raids were a catalyst for change, forcing the Anglo-Saxons and other European societies to adapt their military strategies and political structures in response to this new threat. Understanding the past is crucial for preventing future conflicts. By studying the events that led to the Lindisfarne Raid and the broader context of the Viking Age, we can gain insights into the complex factors that contribute to conflict. Political instability, economic competition, cultural clashes, and the human desire for power and dominance. The collection of essays called Medieval Violence, A Reader, explores various aspects of violence in the Middle Ages. In the introduction, Thomas F. Madden emphasizes the importance of studying violence in historical context. Violence was an integral part of medieval society, but it was not random or senseless. It was shaped by social, political, and economic forces, as well as by cultural values and beliefs. The enduring power of faith is evident in the aftermath of the Lindisfarne Raid. Despite the destruction and trauma, the Christian community did not abandon their faith. They rebuilt their churches, continued their prayers, and found solace in their religious beliefs. Faith provided a source of strength and resilience in the face of adversity and violence. In the book Ecclesiastical History of the English People by Bede writes about the early Christian communities in England, emphasizing the importance of faith in overcoming challenges. He writes, "By faith they conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised. They shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength." Diana Wood, the author of A History of Christianity in England, discusses the role of faith in the face of Viking raids. She writes, "The Viking attacks on monasteries and churches were a profound shock to the Anglo-Saxon Christian community. However, rather than diminishing their faith, these attacks often served to strengthen it, leading to a renewed emphasis on piety and religious reform. The Viking Age, despite its violence and upheaval, was also a period of cultural exchange and interconnectedness. The Vikings, through their raids, trade, and settlements, interacted with diverse communities across Europe. They exchanged ideas, technologies, and cultural practices, leaving a lasting impact on the societies they encountered." Stefan Brink and Neil Price, the writers of the book The Viking World, in their comprehensive overview of Viking society and culture, emphasize the importance of cultural exchange. They write, "The Viking world was not a closed and isolated society. It was connected to and influenced by other cultures through trade, travel, and migration. This interaction led to a dynamic exchange of ideas, technologies, and cultural practices. Lessons from the past are not just about remembering the tragedies and conflicts. They're also about recognizing the resilience of the human spirit, the enduring power of faith, and the potential for cultural exchange and understanding. The raid on Lindisfarne, a dark chapter in history, ultimately reminds us of the importance of peace, tolerance, and the interconnectedness of all humanity."